Okay, so I need to jump into this thing because I really thought I was going to come with Mr. Lightweight sermon today, and the more time I spent with it, the more I just felt like, well, I've got to say this, I got to say, and I apologize for that. We have one sermon in Mark after this, and then we're going to move on into what about the Gentiles? Probably a question you're not even asking, but we're going to move on into it. And I'm going to try to teach you to ask the question. And we're going to try to answer the question. But I want to bring you greetings. You guys sent greetings up to Sedley, Saskatchewan, a small community of 300. That's the town size. The congregation size is significantly smaller. And we had a great time of fellowship with them last weekend. Thank you for your prayers. We appreciate you remembering us as we were going up there. And we had a couple drive over some 80 miles away from Moose Jaw. That's a great name, isn't it? Moose Jaw. They came both days, which was quite remarkable. And somebody flew in from Calgary, Alberta. They always come in when I go up there, so it was fun to have them come in as well. So we had a great reunion, and I already told my joke to the Bible study, but I'll trot it out anyway. They do like American news. They like to follow us as kind of the ruffian nation down south that has wild politics and all this sort of stuff, and so they follow American news, and so they talk about it when we come, and they are quite concerned. They are concerned as we are concerned with where our nation is going, because their nation is not trailing behind that far. In fact, they're probably beyond us in terms of completely surrendering to socialism, but the matriarch of the congregation, after the final day was over, and we were sitting there all together in this living room and enjoying visiting, and she says, "Do you think there are 10 righteous down there?" Which, of course, is a great illusion, right? Sodom and Gomorrah would have been rescued had there been 10 righteous. So we have a job to do. We need to walk forward in righteousness and encourage others to walk that way too, because maybe God will look on our nation with mercy because of the righteous. All right. We had a great time Wednesday night, and we can talk about that later, but very exciting to hear about the interest in Israel in the Jewish king, Yeshua Minatzeret, Yeshua from Nazareth. And they say that in the last 30 years ago, missionaries had almost no response. Today, there's many people asking about it, wanting to know something about him. With that in mind, we're going to go on to the greatest event of his time on earth. And so we're going to be looking at unheard of things, surprised, alarmed, trembling, afraid. I pulled these out, of course, of the text. Who was surprised? Pilate was surprised. What? He's dead already? People don't die that fast on the cross. The women were alarmed when they stepped into the tomb, and there was somebody sitting. The women fled from the tomb, trembling and afraid. So we're going to look at this event, the burial, the resurrection. We're looking at Mark 15:42 through 16:8. That brings us to the end of Mark, the short ending of Mark. There's a longer ending that we'll look at next week. We're going to call the sermon, Tell Us the End of the Story, or something like that. This is a great picture of a tomb. Steps down into the work pit. Here's a bench. Here you can see some of the kukim going back. Now this is quite an elaborate tomb compared to, a very nice tomb when you look at the kukim back here and the nice straight cut on the rock and such, the number of steps leading down in, the rolling stone out front. But anyway, let's go on with our reading. And so please stand as we read the text for today. When evening had already come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea came, a prominent member of the council, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God, and he gathered up courage and went in before Pilate and asked him for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised that he was already dead by this time, and summoning the centurion, he questioned him as to whether he was already dead. And ascertaining this from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Joseph bought a linen cloth, took him down, wrapped him in the linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb which had been hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were looking on to see where he was laid. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He has risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." They went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Father, thank you for the text of this great event. And open our eyes. May your Spirit teach us. May we walk more completely in the truth of what it means that we have risen with the Master. Our eyes should be on him. We bless you in his name. Amen. You may be seated. So unheard of. Oops. I think it's thinking about things. Now it's going to do a couple of them. Unheard of things. I'm dealing with on the third day. And, I might actually go off the screen today. I made use of the whole screen once in a while. But anyway, our text provides temporal markers for the time that the Master was in the tomb. It starts out, it was on the preparation day, the day before the Sabbath. That would be the day before the weekly Sabbath, so it would be Friday. Of course, we'll come back to that later. When the Sabbath was over, the women bought spices. So there was a day that passed when they did nothing. When the Sabbath was over, they went out and bought spices. This we can deal again with that. How do you buy? What's it mean to buy spices when the Sabbath is over? Then early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb. So we have these three time designations within the text today. And Yeshua had said 3 times, or Mark records Yeshua saying 3 times, that he would rise on the third day. So right after Peter had said, "You are the Christ, you are the Messiah," it says he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. They were leaving that place where Peter had made that pronouncement in the shadow of Mount Hermon, and they were walking back to Galilee, and he was still teaching them, and he was saying, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise in 3 days. They left the Galilee, and they were on their way to Jerusalem, and they were walking down the Jordan Valley, and they were approaching Jericho, and once again he took them aside, and he said to them, the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and scribes. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and scourge him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again. Now notice I have given a different translation each time. So after 3 days, rise again. He will rise in 3 days. 3 days later he will rise again. The phrase is the same all the time in Greek. Metatres hemeres, metatres hemeres, metatres hemeres. But translators translate it variously, as if it's after 3 days, as if it's on the third day, as if it's 3 days later. So you'll see translations varying, and this can even be within one translation. They will vary the way they handle this phrase. So I'm going to take you to those 3 days for a moment. Day 1 is the 6th day of the week. Day 2 is the 7th day of the week. And day 3 is the first day of the next week. So day 1 is Friday before sunset. Day 2 is from Friday's sunset until Saturday's sunset. And day 3 is going to be Sunday after Saturday's sunset. Mona, could you get some? Day 1, he died and was put in the tomb. Day 2, he's in the tomb. Day 3, after resurrection, or he rose from the dead after darkness had settled in on day 3. That does not mean on Sunday night. It means on what to us would be Saturday night. So after sunset, sunset on Saturday, sometime within the dark hours that follow that sunset, he rose from the dead. I'm making this point because sometimes we think that we need 72 hours. The American mind says 3 days, 24-hour periods, 72 hours. But the gospel texts do not allow for it. Thank you. Well, likewise, Paul said that the Master was raised on the third day. He says, I delivered to you as of first importance that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. I'm going to say, where do the Hebrew Scriptures say he will be raised on the third day? I know that he himself refers to the Jonah text, but Paul is not drawing on the Jonah text. Paul is drawing, I believe, on Hosea 6:2, where the text says, he will revive us after 2 days. He will deliver us on the third day. Paul is being a good Jewish theologian. He's being a good rabbinic scholar. And he's saying, I know that Yechayenu can be either he will revive us or he will revive him. And he's also saying, I know that Yiminenu can be either, Yikimenu can be either he will raise him or us, or he will raise him. And so Paul is saying, I'm choosing to read it as He will revive him after 2 days. He will raise him on the third day. In order to understand that, you have to accept my my interpretation of the ending. What happens is the little EH that you see in the brackets there gets dropped out because it's such a weak letter. And so what used to be Yikimenehu becomes Yikimenu, and we see it quite often in the text. And that means it can either be we, us, or him. So the Hebrew phrase that translates the green, he will raise him up on the third day, is Bayom HaShlishi Yikimenu. And there's a reason I'm doing this. Very little translation. On the day, the third, he will raise him. And in Corinthians, Paul writes down, Egergetai tehemera tetrete, which very literally is, he was raised on the day the third. What's the significance of that? It's not very comfortable Greek. Paul is reflecting very accurately the Hebrew text. On the day, the third. This is the way you do it in Hebrew. On the day, the third. And Paul preserves it in Greek. On the day, the third, he will raise him. All right. I've given you my argument for seeing it in those 3 days, within those 3 days, as Mark presents it. Now let's look at day 1. The master dies and is buried. Day 2, a Sabbath of waiting. Day 3, the master rises and lives. And so day 1 is what we're after. The master dies, and we're seeing dies and is buried, and we're going to see the request for the body, Pilate's surprise, and the entombment. We're going to move through this rather rapidly because there's not it's quite obvious text. They go in, Joseph of Arimathea goes in and requests the body. We've already read the text. A couple of things I'm pulling out are, it was preparation day for Sabbath. It was preparation day for the Sabbath. Preparation day for the Sabbath is Friday. And this was also a high Sabbath. How's that work? Like it worked for us this year. We were preparing Friday to celebrate the weekly Sabbath. But it just so happened this year that we celebrated the Passover on the night of the weekly Sabbath, right? So they came together. Preparation day happens every week on a Friday as you get ready for the Sabbath. And that year and this year, the Passover Seder fell on a Friday evening. Notice that Joseph of Arimathea is a prominent member of the council. That's the high court of Israel. That's the Sanhedrin. This is very important. I mean, to have somebody of that stature, part of the Sanhedrin, the master stood before the ex-high priest, Annas, and was passed on to the high priest, Caiaphas, and was taken to a portion of the Sanhedrin. We have to say it was Joseph of Arimathea there. This is before, then they said, okay, we believe the charge of blasphemy is strong enough. Let's send him off to Pilate and tell Pilate that he claims to be king of the Jews, and so he is rebelling against Rome. Joseph of Arimathea was also one who was waiting for the kingdom. Well, there were a lot in Israel waiting for the kingdom, but used in the New Testament, it must mean, or we're going to see evidence that it means, that he was saying, I believe Yeshua from Nazareth is the King of the Jews and is going to bring the kingdom. Matthew tells us that. He had become a disciple of Jesus. John tells us that. He was a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews. So, Pilate was surprised that he was already dead. He'd probably crucified a lot of people, or ordered them crucified. He knew they could hang on the cross for a couple of days with their leg. They could hang for a while, and then when they needed breath, they could lift themselves up and breathe until they'd go back down. And so now, of course, a problem is coming because the Sabbath is coming on, and the Jews don't want their Sabbath defiled, especially their Passover defiled, with 3 Jews hanging on the cross outside the gates of Jerusalem. So Pilate says, "Is he really dead already?" Joseph, "Yes, he's dead." Pilate says to his attendant, "Go bring the centurion." The centurion comes in. And Pilate says, "Is he really dead already? This one they call the King of the Jews. Did he die?" And the centurion says, "Yes, we were going around, we were breaking legs." So they couldn't lift themselves up, of course, to get their breath. And we saw that he was already dead. "You saw he was already dead? Did you test it out?" And the centurion says, "Yes, one of the soldiers stuck a spear in his side, and blood and water came out. He was dead." John remembers the Master saying that he will lay down his life. It won't be taken from him. None of his bones will be broken, is another thing that John recalls. So John is telling us these details that we don't receive from the other Gospels, because we're supposed to look back and see the Master say, "I lay down my life for the sheep. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father." That's amazing. These are unheard of things. Why do we have issues like euthanasia and stuff like that? Because none of us have the authority to lay down our lives. This is something the Master had. And he did lay down his life. And he did take it up again. Because the Father loves him. He is the Son of the Father. So then we have the entombment. And Joseph brought a linen cloth, took him down, wrapped it. We already read this. John records that Joseph was not alone. There's somebody else from the Sanhedrin who came. It was Nicodemus. This is the guy who came to Jesus in John 3 at night because he didn't want to be seen. And he's asking him about life. And what must I do to be saved? And he's told, "You must be born again." And he says, "That's kind of strange. I'm already a Jew. How on earth am I to become a Jew again? I'm a Jew and Jews are saved." And Jesus is talking about a spiritual salvation. And so he instructs him. But Nicodemus comes and he brings along the spices that are needed, myrrh and aloes, and about 100 pounds weight. Noctimon is known in rabbinic literature, and supposedly a very, very wealthy man. And we think that Noctimon is probably the Nicodemus of the New Testament. So they took the body of Jesus, bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So I'm going to give you a picture of Jerusalem again. We are standing on the Mount of Olives. We're looking across the Kidron Valley. This is a very accurate drawing of Jerusalem of the Second Temple period. The walls that the far northern wall that you see, this wall here, they began to build it in 42, and Rome made them quit. They finished building it in 66. So that wall was not here. We need to X out that wall. That wall was not here at the time of the Master. And we had, when we last met, we had the Master here in the Praetorium, and he is going to be taken out, I believe, to this place here. You can see a rocky knoll that they put in the drawing there, and maybe you can't see it, but that's the traditional place of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place of the traditional place of the tomb, and the place of the resurrection. In the last 2 centuries, a place has been developed over here by the Anglicans, and they say, we like this place better because it's not a big, ugly church standing over top of it, and they present very good arguments that convince people. But the Israeli archaeologists say, no, it's much more likely that this is the place as well. It has the strength of a long tradition all the way back, let's say all the way back to the 1st century. What happened there? So here you can see the city wall. We go outside the city wall. This is a drawing my nephew made for me one time. Outside the city wall is the rocky knoll. This all used to be a quarry. So they had quarried away rock, and they came to this rock, and the stone specialists of Jerusalem, they still build with a lot of stone, they went in and checked out this rocky knoll, and they say that was poor limestone. When they hit that, they said, we're leaving that limestone, and they worked around. They exposed a scarp in back, and tombs were put into this scarp. So that's the way it is. You have a quarry. What do you do with an old quarry? You dig into the sides and you make tombs there. And so that's what it looks something like that. And there I had them put in some olive groves because it was a little bit too hard to draw any flowers around here on such a small thing. But anyway, it says, now the place where he was crucified, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had been laid. So it's all within close proximity. Golgotha, the scarp with the tomb. In the 2nd century, Hadrian, when he rebuilt Jerusalem after it was in the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the city destroyed in 70, returned to the city, but then Hadrian is going to plow the city under in 135 and rebuild it. And because the believers were bringing people and saying, here's where he died, here's where he was buried, Hadrian says, I will stamp out that tradition. This is the Roman emperor, and he builds a temple here to Venus, and I think sets a statue of Jupiter on top of Golgotha. In the 4th century, at the Council of Nicaea, they say, by this time Constantine is Christianized. He says, I don't want these pagan temples around. Remove that thing and build a church. So Eusebius records the excitement as they find the rocky knoll, as they find the tombs. And so Constantine puts in the martyrion, basilica structure, a courtyard which has the rocky knoll in it, and the Anastasis, which is over the tomb where the resurrection would take place. Okay, excuse me. So on day 2, a Sabbath of waiting, they saw where he was laid. They rested on the Sabbath. What does Mark say? They saw where he was laid. Of course, this is not yet day 2. This is when we're still in day 1. So Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were looking on to see where he was laid. That's before dark on Friday. Then we have Sunset Friday. And then Mark doesn't tell us anything at all about Sabbath, about Saturday. But Sunset Saturday, he says, when Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might come and anoint him. So, how's this go? It gets dark and the stores open up. Still happens today. Gets dark on Sabbath, Jewish stores open up. In fact, it must have been happening like that from centuries ago. Amos says, you guys say, when will the Sabbath be over so we can buy and sell? So what's going on that day? It's a Sabbath of waiting. With limited mourning. Because your Sabbath joy should not be given to mourning. In fact, Luke tells us what went on. They returned from watching the tomb and prepared spices and perfumes. They got spices and perfumes from their neighbors. They found what was in the house. And on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. Then when Sabbath was over, they went out to get the other spices that they knew they would need to provide the proper burial. Well, we're moving on to the Master rises and lives. And so we're going to look lightly at walk to the tomb, alarmed by the man in white, and trembling and afraid. So the walk to the tomb. Very early, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Now you're going to hear different times. If you're looking at Matthew, it's like we've just passed into that first day. And it's like as you pass in, the day is dawning. Even though the sun is not yet coming. They're making preparations. They're anticipating. But they need enough light. So they're waiting until they can see the sun shining behind the Mount of Olives. They're on their way. As they're going, they're saying, who will roll away the stone? Looking up, they saw that it was moved. Matthew tells us how it happened. A severe earthquake occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. You wonder if one of these guards became a believer, because how does he say, that angel was sitting on the stone? It's a story that's circulating among the believers. I wouldn't be surprised, but what the guards did become believers. Especially after Pentecost. Maybe they were in the group that repents at Pentecost. The women say, should we go in? Well, it's open. Let's go in. That's what we're concerned about, being able to move that stone. They step in. They saw the man. They were alarmed. He said to them, don't be alarmed. We've already read this. Well, quickly, do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. So a couple of observations. He refers to him as Yeshua HaNotzri. That means Yeshua the Nazarene in Hebrew. Did you know that we are Notzrim? In Hebrew today, we are Notzrim. They call us Notzrim, Nazarenes. We're followers of HaNotzri, the Nazarene. I love this state. You're looking for Yeshua HaNotzri. You guys are all going to become Notzrim. Did you know that? So then we, oops. Uh-oh, things are going to go twice now at some point. Okay, a young man was, there it went twice. A young man was, this thing, it's like it maybe falls asleep, I'm not sure, but it doesn't react as quickly as I would like it to react. And I thought I had a text underneath it that said a young man was sitting on the right side. I'm showing you the top plan. So here's the stone wall I was telling the kids about. Here's the steps leading down into the work pit. Here are the benches. Here are the various kukim off the back sides of the benches. And so the women arrive at the tomb, and they're saying, shall we go in? And one of them takes the bold step and moves in. And so the others proceed in as well, down the steps, bending over into the tomb. I might as well go too. I don't want to be left out here in the dark. And as soon as they get in, a young man was sitting on the right. Kaboom. And they were alarmed. Okay. Go to Galilee, just as he told you. Just as he told you. When did he tell us that? Well, it was when they had finished the Passover, keeping their Passover Seder on Thursday night. They went out, they're crossing the Kidron Valley, and the Master said, you will all fall away. Zechariah said, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Yes, he had told them we will meet up in the Galilee, which is interesting because they actually meet up before they get to the Galilee. So it says, the women went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Whew. That's the end of the first edition of the book of Mark. What a place to leave it. Why would you leave it there? This is what we call the shorter ending of Mark. And I'm asking, why this strange, abrupt ending? They went out, fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They couldn't help but believe. They had seen the empty tomb. They had seen the angel. The message, he's not here, he is risen. Maybe it had to do with Peter's audience. Remember, Peter is narrating the gospel. And Peter's audience is suffering greatly. They're afraid to be known to be believers. And so this might be the place to leave it at this point. You can't help but believe. I'm here giving you the testimony that we know he was dead. We know he was buried. We know he rose from the dead. We know he ascended into heaven. You can't help but believe. But it's okay to be fearful and trembling in times of trouble. But you can't help but believe. Hold on to that. We'll look at the longer ending of Mark next week. What am I going to do now? I'm going to step you through something we have done the last two resurrection services, only in a little different style. I'm paralleling Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. I don't know if you can read all of Mark out there. But anyway, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to step down. And the problem is, you can see there's a lot of lacunae. They don't all tell the same story. You have some glaring differences, such as who was going, who went to the tomb, who arrived first, such as was it one angel or two angels? And of course, this gives skeptics a lot of opportunity to say, oh, real confused story. I'm not so sure that that really happened. But Paul is convinced that it happened. He appeared to Cephas, he appeared to the 11, he appeared to James, he appeared to 500 others, and he appeared to me. He's alive, Paul says. And we believe it happened. I'm going to say there's no other event in human history that has been talked about as much. There is no other event in Jesus' life that would have been talked about as much. Everybody who was in Jerusalem at the time would have a story. When I first heard about it, this is who told me. And so the stories are becoming many. I'm looking for proliferate. Proliferating. And the stories are becoming many. And so as the gospel writers, they're pulling in. Okay, I heard them talking about this. And Luke is interviewing to see what's going on. And he interviews one of the women. There were two angels. And so we have it beginning with Mark. He's put in the tomb, and Mark says the women went out to buy spices. The next morning, who went? Mary Magdalene is in every story, but Mark says Mary and two others. Mary, the mother of Joseph, and I can't remember. I should remember. I'm just looking at the text. But anyway, Matthew says Mary Magdalene and one other. And Luke says at least 4 women. Mary Magdalene is 4 women. John says Mary went to the tomb alone. Whoa, big glaring difficulty. Wait a minute, how about this? Were they all staying in the same house in Jerusalem? They'd bought spices the night before, they divided them up. We're going to meet at the tomb tomorrow morning. And Mary Magdalene wants to get there a little bit early. So she heads out, or maybe she just had a shorter route, and she arrives first. She comes to the tomb. On her way, she's wondering too, how would I actually just wait till they come, I guess. I will weep. I will sit on the ground and weep outside the tomb. That's what I intend to do. But as she's going, there's an earthquake, or sometime there's this earthquake, and the angel moves the stone. And so in Mark, the women are coming, and they're saying, what are we going to do about that stone? But John says that Mary came and found the stone already moved. And she assumes immediately they've stolen the body. And she turns and she runs to tell Simon Peter. She's gone. And the other women arrive and they say, wow, the stone is moved. Mary says to Simon after beating on the door, she says, they've taken his body. I don't know where they've put it. The other women step in the tomb, and there's that young man sitting there. Matthew says an angel says to the women, do not be alarmed, do not be alarmed. We're just doing Mark and Matthew. The angel says the same thing. He is risen, he is risen. Tell his disciples, go to everything's abbreviated because they only have little space. Go to Galilee. So they go to Galilee. No, they don't. Not yet. So I'm going to explain Luke now. Here's our tomb picture. And if you have one, maybe you can expect another. So there might have been a second man sitting on the left who didn't talk at first. Boom, there he is. And so we look at, maybe we're listening to the second angel's speech. Hey, why are you seeking the living among the dead? He is risen. He said he would arise, didn't he? And yes, they remembered that. Everybody had been puzzling. What's it mean? They're going to kill me and I'm going to rise again on the 3rd day. Yes, they remembered it. And it confirmed. He had said it 3 times. He had mentioned the resurrection at least 2-3 other times. Not in that same sort of full statement. He said he would rise, and he did. Mark says the women fled, afraid. They did not tell anyone. after they've had a little time to let their spirits calm down, they're not breathing as heavy. They're saying, what did he say? He said, go tell the disciples. And so yes, they did go to tell the disciples, Matthew says, and Luke says. Mark's story ended. In Matthew's story, the Master appears to them as they're on their way. These are unheard of things. Who ever heard of somebody rising from the dead? I mean, by himself. I mean, without somebody praying over him or smacking him. I mean, he just came up. He's risen. He lives. In Messiah Yeshua, we have passed from death unto life. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, when this perishable body puts on the imperishable, when this mortal body puts on immortality, then the sayings that have been said in old scriptures will come true. Death is swallowed up in victory. Where on earth is that saying? That saying is found in Isaiah 25. Beautiful text. I think I will actually preach on that when I preach about what about the Gentiles. Because what the prophet is seeing is that hostile nations are destroyed, but when they are, all the nations begin glorifying and revering God, and God, it says, prepares a great banquet on that mountain. What's that mountain? In Jerusalem. And after preparing that great banquet, it says, and on this mountain he will swallow up the covering which is over all peoples. What's the covering? Death. Even the veil which is stretched over all nations. He will swallow up death for all time. And the Lord God will wipe away the tears from many faces. It's like this, Paul says. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? That text comes from Hosea. And Paul is reinterpreting that text. It's actually kind of a negative text in Hosea, or some translators make it negative. But the way Paul's understanding it is, I shall ransom. So in Hosea, he is pronouncing punishment on Ephraim for its sins. And in verse 14, he would say, I shall ransom, what's that, 13, 14. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. O death, where are your thorns? O Sheol, where's Sheol? Sheol's the grave. Where is your sting? Whoops, I didn't mean to leave. I don't know if I can back up. Probably, let me just jump back there quickly and see if I can. I'm sorry about that, gang. Now we got to go through everything real quickly again. So, what's that mean for us? Since it's true, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of God, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. But with it comes other responsibilities. We who believe must live for Him. And so we're told in 2 Corinthians 5, He died for all. Therefore all died, and He died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for Him who died and rose again on their behalf. He died for us. We live for Him. Other responsibilities. We who believe must set our minds on what is His. That's not to take it away. No, that's to be concentrating. So if you've been raised with Christ, seek what's up above. He's seated at the right hand. Set your mind on things above, not on things on this earth. What do we have? Well, we have to do things on this earth in order to live. But where is our joy and our mind supposed to be? Set on Him. for we have died and our life is hidden with Christ in God. We who believe must take confidence in him and rest in him. Interesting text in light of the women who fled from the tomb in fear. Christ Jesus is he who died, yes, rather who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? Well, tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Was ever text more relevant to the believers in Iraq, to the believers in Syria, to the believers in Egypt, to the believers in, where else might we name? And will ever text be more relevant to us someday if we don't begin to turn the tide in terms of winning souls to Messiah? Because those who would bring tribulation, distress, persecution are multiplying in this country. Let's close. Father, thank you that he lives, that he sits at the right hand. And may we walk, Lord, may we live for him. May we set our minds on him. May we take great confidence in him. Thank you for the rest we have in him.